Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with mysticgenmara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And tonight I was just going to do a little review for you of, to me, one of the more fascinating books about the East that I have read. It's called Magic and Mystery in Tibet by Alexandra David-Neel. So, there we go. This book is interesting because I kind of got it just to start understanding a little bit more of some of the beliefs and traditions of Tibet. It was after watching 7 Years in Tibet, I was just kind of more curious, and so I started looking into it. And she is a fascinating person. I may talk about her exclusively later. But this book is interesting in that it's not just about the travel. The travel is a huge part of it, but her focus through this entire thing, and that's why I really do enjoy it, was on the practices of the Tibetans, both the nuns and the monks. She was one of the first women from the West. I believe she was from France. Of course, I can't find it now. Anyway, but she was able to get involved into a lot of the deeper sacred teachings of the Tibetan Buddhists. And she was there for around 14 years, give or take. But from what I have found, she left when she was 50. So you're never too old to start something new. During the time she wandered with mystics while she was there, she talked to monks. She was actually invited when the Dalai Lama was still in power in Tibet. She was actually welcomed and greeted by him specifically, and from what she talks about in here, they had a small conversation, which isn't that big of a deal, but it is a big deal because you don't usually get to talk to the Dalai Lama one-on-one. It's usually in a group setting. She talks about some of her experience with the mad, quote-unquote, mystics from the wilds of Tibet. She talks about different elements and different things that she saw that were what we would call today paranormal or supernatural, preternatural, whatever term you want to use. There was one monk who had learned a technique of traveling extremely far, extremely fast at night specifically, and she watched him do this. She learned herself different ways to stay warm all the time, and she puts different exercises in here. There's like a Tumo exercise, which, let me double check that because I can't remember off the top of my head. But at least I put down page numbers. The Tumo exercise is on 220. This is one of the ways that you can gain warmth, and it's basically visualizing a golden lotus in your belly, in line with your navel, your belly button, and from here you start chanting very specific tones, which are basically building the feminine deity. That's what I was talking about, looking for. So you're working with your divine feminine, but it's a way to build heat within the body. She goes into, let me find the right page. I can't say this without reading it in the sentence because it's weird the way it's spelled. So it's the keel course, there we go. And it's not something that is easy to understand because they're a different being. They're the type of person who's like a wild man type thing, but they're trained very specifically in a spiritual, I believe it's a spiritual energy they have to be initiated through to get to it. But she goes through these different exercises, different ways to really tap into your deeper mind. She talks about her mala that, I I don't know if I have a picture. There's a picture. She has like 16 or 17 pictures in here, which doesn't sound like a lot, but you have to remember the time frame. Pictures were exceptionally expensive, so to even have those is impressive and kind of super important. I thought I had one of just her in here. But it gives you a different look as to what the Tibetans are. It's not just learning how to chant. It's not just learning how to live in peace with nature and, do no harm and things like that. It's so much more than what we in the West assume, because we're just assuming. But if you are interested in maybe learning a little bit more about some of the other practices, but yeah, there's like a picture here of this Sung Yum, the consort of the mystic Lama, which is she's a woman, and then there's just a random picture of a nun, and she was able to get these pictures, and in that time, that was an extremely special thing to be able to get pictures like this. There's one in particular where she's standing in all of her Tibetan garb, and I can't find it right now. But it's, like I said, it's worth the read if you're into Buddhism, because what we have in the West, and I've read a fair amount, not a master of it by any stretch, but what we have here is a very clean version of Buddhism. It's a very cut and dried, this is what we do, this is how we practice. But when you get into what she talks about in here, you get into more of the guts. This is a lot of Tibetan Buddhist practices and teachings are not just spiritual but survival. Like there's a couple of them, like I said, about building that inner heat. It's not just a spiritual heat, it's a physical heat. And when practiced properly, you could actually get to a point where being outside in your skivvies, that you'd be perfectly warm. Matter of fact, you could be steaming because you've been building that much heat inside of you. And when you look at some of the stories of the ancient Buddhists being able to walk around virtually nude in the mountains where it's, snowing and 50 below, there's a reason for that. And it's not just, what do I want to call it? It's not legend and superstition. Alexandra David-Neel was just a woman who was a practicing Buddhist and wanted to see the roots. So she went to the place where it started, one of the places it started. And what she found there was far more than she had anticipated. There are exercises that she goes through. I referenced to the one on page 222, or not 222, 220 and 220 and 266 are two of the exercises. There's about 7 in here, and they work. I've tried a couple of them because I was curious, was this just something that she had an experience with, or did these actually do that? And she gives you the steps, and I'm not going to steal her work, but she gives you the steps on how to properly produce the effect. And from what I've experienced with experimenting with them, when you properly do them, and this is not just oh, look, I did it, you have to build up to it. So you have to do the meditations, you have to build the visualizations. When you get to a point, suddenly it just happens. And it almost is startling, but it's almost like anticlimactic, because you've been building towards that for so long that when it happens, you're like, yeah, oh, well, this is what I expected it to be, so, and you just kind of move on with life. But like I said, it's not so much a travel guide. This one is really just kind of going over generals of what she did while she was there. This book is not all 14 years. I mean, it covers 320 pages, and it goes over a lot, but it's kind of like the crib notes version of her experience. So, like I said, if you're interested in Tibet, you want to learn a little bit more about Tibetan Buddhism, maybe dig into some of the mysteries and the more mystical side of it, because what she talks about is it almost makes what we see in the West sterile. Like, oh, look how clean and nice this is. She's like, yeah, that's true and that works, but there's more to it. So this gets you a little bit more into the practical aspects of it, not just the saying of mantras and the saying of, repeating certain life patterns. She goes into a lot more of the meat and bones of it. That's not to say what we know here in the West is bad. She just had a very unique experience, and being who she was during the time, because this was in the early 1900s, not a time that was exceptionally common for women to do things like this, but she did it very well, and I really do recommend this particular book, even if it's only for historical reference purposes. She has a lot of other works. I've only read a couple of the other ones, but this one in particular, I will say, if you want just kind of a general idea of what she experienced and kind of the concepts that she developed over the time she was there, this is the one, because it gives you the highlights. So I hope you guys enjoy the book if you do pick it up. If you're new here, please hit that like button and that subscribe button. Leave comments below if you've read anything by her, or if you've read this book, what were your thoughts? What did you think of her experiences? Like I said, to me they were pretty fascinating, but let me know in the comments below, and I will see you in a future video.